All right, I think it worked. Shabbat Shalom. We are live and in full effect, but we're using Zoom today. And the reason why we're using Zoom today is because I wanted to show you guys some images and some maps and some charts. And we've used Zoom live on for other videos, but I thought it'd be perfect for today. Also, there's a bunch of reading, and I thought it would be cool for us to share our screens. So as we read through the reading, talk about the concepts, you guys can get some visual aids. So we're trying something new, so bear with us. All right. Okay, so let me minimize that screen and pull this one up. Today we're in 1 Samuel 27, and the title of the lesson is Hidden in Plain Sight, or Hiding in Plain Sight. And so if you've already pre-read, then you already kind of know why it's such a thing. So in the previous chapter, David and Saul meet face to face, and they're in front of David's 600 men and Saul's 3,000 men. And Saul pretty much confesses that Yah's going to do great things with David. And oh, mind you, there's a whole farm on this on both sides. So if you hear animals, it is happening. That's a chicken. She's letting us know she's laying an egg. Okay. So Saul said, and that's Randy. So Saul tells David that Yah is going to bless him. And he says, you shall achieve and you shall prevail. And so he's forced to then prophesy, if you will, or say good words over David, even though it's not really where Saul's heart is, as we know. Okay, so chapters 27 opens up with David kind of like thinking to himself. And chapter 27 says, David said to himself, someday I shall certainly perish at the hands of Saul. The best thing for me is to flee to the land of the Philistines. Saul will then give up hunting me throughout the territory of Israel, and I will escape him. So we were discussing this. It was interesting because Saul just told him that he was like done. He's, I'm not pursuing you. Saul goes his way, David goes his way. So what makes David think that Saul is going to continue pursuing him even after he says he's not? Well, I can give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think about 9 examples of why. So David believes Saul will eventually kill him. And the root of Saul's issue is his jealousy against David. If you go all the way back to chapter 18, the text says that when David came back from defeating the Philistine, that the people cried out and said, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s, and he became jealous of him. And he said, what if he already has the heart of the people, what more than for him to have the kingdom? It's already his. So his mind is messed up. But remember, the kingdom had been stripped from him. So he's already kind of thinking of who's going to be next. And in his mind, he was hoping to be his son, Jonathan. That way you still keep a little power and control. But if it's somebody completely different, then it's disgraceful and you've been ousted and everybody knows. So Saul had an issue with David because of his disobedience. And we've covered that extensively over the last almost 10 chapters. So why would David think that Saul was going to still kill him after that big showdown? The men on his side knew, the men on Saul's side heard. It should have been just a wash, right? It's done. He's no longer pursuing him. But Saul had lied about killing David over 9 times. So in 1 Samuel 18:11, 1 Samuel 18:11, Saul is jealous and then he tries to throw a javelin and David eludes him twice. And that's 18 and then 17 through 25. Then Saul, chapter 19, tells Jonathan, all his men, you need to kill David. And then Jonathan tells David, he's like, but let me talk to my dad. And he talks to me, he's like, oh, I promise by Yah, I'm not going to kill him, right? And then again, 1 Samuel 20 and 31, 1 Samuel 23 and 7, 1 Samuel 23 and 25, 1 Samuel 24 and 3, and then 1 Samuel 26 and 2. These are all the times after Saul said that he wasn't going to kill David that he continued to pursue him. So then it makes perfectly good sense why David's like, I don't trust him. And if I keep playing this cat and mouse game, eventually something's going to go wrong. So he goes, I'm certainly going to perish. Saul thought that David was still, even after everything, Saul knew, he knew that David was going to be king, and his want and his hatred for Yah's decree because of his own disobedience caused him to want to kill David. All right. So David says, the best thing for me is to flee to the land of the Philistines. Okay. Verse 2. So David and 600 men with him went across over to King Achish, son of Moab of Gath. And David and his man stayed with Achish and Gath, each man with his family, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelite, and Abigail, wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And when Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he did not pursue him anymore. So right there, we know that even after Saul said he wasn't going to pursue David, he still had it purpose in his heart to pursue David. So it was not until Saul knew that he was in Gath amongst the Philistines that he stopped pursuing him. Saul was not going to stop pursuing David, and this was evident. He sought to kill him, but when he found out that he was with the Philistines, he counted him as dead. So we talked yesterday, we talked last week extensively about the wilderness. We're going to revisit that theme again this time. But now we're looking at the wilderness, and now the chosen or the elect being within the bounds of their enemy. It's very interesting. And we're going to look at the similitude of David being within the territory of the Philistines, which were the enemies of Israel, and us as a people being disenfranchised and being within the boundaries of our enemies. I often speak specifically from the context of the Western world, that Western world being specifically the Americas, because that is where I dwell and that is where my geographical expertise exists. But I don't think it doesn't take away from those who have been scattered to the 4 corners of the world. So I want to make that very, very specific. But because it is strongly believed that the placement of the Hebrews here in the Americas represent Judah, Benjamin, and the Levites that dwell within their gates, then Judah, being the kingly tribe, sets a precedence. And what's done to Judah here is then reverberated, and you can see it all over. So by using one example, it doesn't take away from another, but it actually reinforces everything else you see elsewhere. All right. So outer placement in the wilderness of the people, which we learned last week from Ezekiel 20, can be likened to David's placement amongst the Philistines. Our placement as a nation amongst the Egyptians, and we can even look at Messiah's placement amongst the Egyptians or in the house of bondage, right? And also even Moses. So it's a motif. It is a constant motif that Yah has often used the place of the enemy as a place of protection for his elect. I know that sounds so counterintuitive, but if you follow the theme, it has been done over and over and over again. And that's where our title of Hidden in Plain Sight comes from. Okay. The best place to hide something is right in somebody's face, because it's your least likely place to look. I've done it a million times. I know you guys have. You lose something, right? And you know you put it where you put it, and you're looking everywhere around for that thing, and literally it could be sitting right here in front of you. When something is so blatantly in our face and so out in the open, our minds automatically say, oh, that can't be it, because that which is hidden must be concealed. But sometimes it's the outright upfront view of something that makes it even more hidden, because our brains tell us that can't be it. Too simple. That was too simple. Yah has hidden us even in the midst of our disobedience among the nations. So we talked about it, the wilderness of the peoples. We have an enemy, though, that seeks our life. So similar to David, he has a call. He's supposed to be king. He's supposed to be a representative of Yah. His life is supposed to be a light, and also sets a lot of the precedents for how we view our Hamashiach, our real king, Yah, who has dwelled among us. And so there is a constant battle between him, himself, and his adversaries to get him to mess up how he's supposed to be represented outwardly to the world. We also have that same issue. We have an enemy, an adversary that seeks our life. We're going to read that extensively today. And the added increase of our death, especially in modern times during this awakening, is directly correlated to who we are. When we awake to the knowledge of who we are not just awakening to ourselves, but the world, and more importantly, to the accuser. A whole system has been set in place due to our disenfranchisement, and our awakening directly threatens the house of cards that has been established due to our disobedience. Make that make sense? So there's a system in place. I'll use the biblical story and then I'll bring the parallel. Before David was called to be king, Israel asked for a king, thus rejecting Yah. It's a constant issue that we have as a people, being this people. They asked for a king, they rejected Yah. And in the rejection of Yah, Yah told them of what manner of king they would have. And so Saul was good, right? He started off as a good person. He started off doing what Yah said to do, but then he fell, obviously, to the wayside. And so because of his disobedience, Yah then chooses another king. He chooses somebody after his own heart who's going to lead according to how he tells that person to lead. But see, Saul has an issue because he wants to stay in power. So then it now becomes his personal mission to oppress and upset David because he understands that now somebody else is going to rule. And in his mind, that means rule over him because he truly doesn't understand the context of how a king is supposed to rule in Israel. In this nation, who has captured Yah's elect, placed them into a land, all by his divine order, so not because he didn't allow it, placed them there and kept them in captivity for pretty much, we've been in the land of our captivity for 400 years. When it comes time for Yah to shift and now restore back what belonged to those people, there is always going to be oppression because that restoration means the end of something that was previous. Most people would immediately say, oh, it's the end of white privilege. But see, the battle is not against Black people and white people. That's a surface visual. That's a created battle, right? So we fight the false battle, but the true battle is that the nations, the whole world worked together in crafty counsel to disenfranchise and conceal the identity of the Hebrew people. As Yah would say, they advance his anger by the practices that they did while they had the people in captivity. And now they know that the next step is recompense for those actions. So if you knew that you were going to have the actions recompensed or brought back and given back to you that you've done to a people, then you would constantly seek to keep that thing out of balance. On an even greater scale, though, there's an adversary. This whole show, if you will, is set up for Yah to get the glory. Yah created Hasatan. Hasatan is a created being, just like the Malachim or the heavenly host. And when he rebelled, and we're going to read through this, he took down 1/3 of those angels who followed him, and they were cast out. Yah then creates order on this place that we now know as Earth, as the land that we live on in this galaxy, in this dimension, in order to show something about himself. See, this whole thing that's going on has nothing to do with us. Mom used to say, a child's place is a safe place. When Yah placed Adam and Chawah here, their place was a safe place. He created a place, he created a garden, and he created them to be an example. And the whole thing was to be a testament of how righteous and just Yah was, and to bring order in order for the condemnation of Lucifer, Hasatan. He's called the adversary, his name is Lucifer, right? The great and bright morning star. He was so magnificent that there had to be a witness against him. Yah was not going to just judge him according to what he had done, but because Yah, in his infinite perfection, does everything correct, he gives a witness and creates man essentially as a testament against Hasatan or against Lucifer. But then man falls and man muddies the water, if you will. It wasn't something that Yah hadn't considered, because remember, he knows what he has created and how crafty and excellent and intelligent and beautiful that is. See, we've been given this strange picture about the adversary, that he's like a devil with horns and a pitchfork. No, he's magnificent. He's been able to elude and to deceive and to use his same tactics with precision for years and years and years and generations over all people, causing them to stumble, right? So we're not dealing with a minute enemy. And so then Yah then, right, just fast forward, and creates a nation, calls a people. He calls Abraham. So Abraham, you're going to have a seed, right? And the seed is going to be great. They're going to be like the sands of, be more than the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky. And I'm going to use you for my name's sake. So then that becomes the adversary's focus. Now, I don't have to worry about all the humans on the planet. I can just zone in. And then it gets even more specific. Then it goes from all of Abraham's kids to Isaac, and then to Jacob. And then you have the 12 tribes. He's like, oh, this is, man, I got like just this little group of people. I'm going to utterly destroy them. And that has been the mission of the adversary. You can look at Balaam. You can look at the Philistines. You can look at the Canaanites, and all the enemies that have been risen up against Israel to destroy them. But the only reason why people can, or I say the adversary can be allowed to act upon Israel is in their disobedience. Yah set it up foolproof. You're my children. You obey me, then all this stuff stays at bay. But when you disobey me, then you create a breach in my protection, and then the adversary is allowed to step in and then wreak havoc. But I'm not going to let the adversary utterly destroy you. Okay, so that's just like a background. So when you look at this nation and you take a disenfranchised people and you bring them here, you steal their language, you steal their culture, you completely erase them of who they are. But Yah hasn't forgot. And you haven't forgot. You know, Yah knows, and now these people are beginning to wake up in the midst of the wilderness of the people and in the midst of their enemies. And so when blacks, I should say, were placed in America, it's very interesting because I know there's like a huge argument about like how like the Bible is a white man's book and the Bible was used to oppress black people. Okay. But I don't know if most of those people who have that thought process have actually done research on what the people who were enslaved believe versus what you were told they believe. Because the people who were enslaved, our ancestors, knew a lot more and connected that book a lot more to them and their land and their places. And parts of the book were used to enslave them. And the parts that were known once they began to read, and they had preachers that were not just oversaw by the white people, they taught about those lands. And you have to think, it wasn't that far removed from them when they read about the Euphrates and the Nile and the lands and the locations at that time. See, we're so far removed, we don't see the connection between those places. But our ancestors were not that far removed. It took a long time to get that out of their minds. Fear kept them from saying it. And then the control of the narrative kept us from hearing it. But they knew. And that's why when they sang the songs that they sung and the Negro spirituals that we hear, they're very, very heavily rooted in scripture. You have to think these people were not allowed to read. So a lot of what they were coming up with and were singing was based upon experience and what they knew and not what they read. Okay. So we live in a place where our revelation of who we are dismantles a broken system. David's becoming king would dismantle Saul's lies because he's saying David is a rogue and David's doing that. So it completely threatens the lie that's being upheld. But see, the difference between humans and Yah doesn't care about the lies you build and how it's going to affect you when he knocks your house of cards down. Doesn't care at all. And so the question comes then in, is this true? Is it really this huge built up lie in this nation? And it's true. There are people in this country who profit more off of Black people disproportionately than anybody else. One are Jewish people. And I'm not making this claim to be anti-Semitic. I'm making this claim to be true. And as a Semitic descendant, I can make this claim. When you're family, you can talk about family, right? Jewish people run the media. They own the sports teams. They own the music industry. They have the ability and the voice to single-handedly speak out against the issues that are occurring within the Black community. You benefit from the Black community. You make money off the Black community, but you don't speak up against the injustice of the Black community. We have to go through social media and we have to march when our friends, right, the people who we work with and we earn money for and with, could literally put it in the media and not suppress it. Because remember, when things are suppressed, it's also coming from the companies like Fox and ABC and Telecom, and all these people who own the media have the ability to vocalize this, okay? So why won't the companies who benefit from Black culture speak up? Because it upsets their house of cards. As long as we are acting like niggas, as long as we are showing our behinds, as long as we are doing the things that have caused us to end up in captivity in the first place, then things stay the same. But when we begin to be obedient, and when we begin to wake up, and when we begin to protect our own, and when we begin to stand up for injustice in the way that Yah said, and when we begin to follow his laws, statutes, and commandments, then it says that he inclines his ear and he listens. See, we don't want, in this country, we don't want Yah to incline his ear. The nations don't want Yah to incline his ear, because then it means that what is inequitable will be made equitable. And see, equality means that everybody gets some. Equity means that all that belongs to them, and for all their heartache and for all their disenfranchisement, you have to replace it all and give it back, which would create a huge disproportionate action amongst the nations. So think of it like this. The Queen of England goes into Africa. Italy has the stuff from the Hebrew monuments and temples and the bones of our ancestors. And then within the lands of Israel, there's not allowed excavation, because hey, if we dig it up, we got to show it. And if we show it, it may not line up with what we've been saying. And the British Museum and all these places would have to collectively gather everything. The Met, right? They'd have to collectively gather everything and give it back, which then would dismantle the wealth of these systems. And it would bring to the reality of the people in the world that you stole this. I saw a comment online. I wish I knew the sister's name who said it, but a lady mentioned that, looting is not the answer. And the sister's response was, oh, so when you guys were looting everything, right, as colonizers and going through and taking everything, it was okay. But now when somebody else takes something, you don't like it. How about you give your stuff back then? Silence. Right? So everyone was hoping that our oppression amongst our enemies would be our demise, especially the adversary. But they didn't know that our oppression was temporary. And see, David, he was wise. He held on to Yah's promise. That's the first part. But he was also obedient to Yah. That's the imperative part. So it solidified the temporariness, if that's even a word, of what was happening to him. So even in going amongst the Philistines, see, the first time, if you don't remember, when he went to Achish, and Achish said, David, he said, and then David got scared. He said that David got scared and he started acting crazy. And he's like, oh, nope, not doing this. But this started spitting and scratching walls. And Achish said, you think I'm gonna bring a crazy man into my house? Get on my face, right? The second time, though, David understood something. I'm under providential care. I have a place and an appointment with Yah. I have something that I need to do. So while I'm on mission for Yah, right, then I hate to use this word, but I'm invincible. I'm untouchable. My death will not come as long as I'm obedient and on the path to where Yah tells me to go. So even if that means dwelling amongst my enemies, I can be wise amongst my enemies and even find favor there. And when we were when we were obedient to Yah in this country, there were moments, right? But Yah knows the nature of children, right? Because we're kids. You do good for a little bit and then, you're going to go back to doing the same thing. But we have had portions of time in this nation where we've been allowed to kind of climb up a little bit, but then we forget Yah. And we were allowed to climb up a little bit, but then we forget. And it's this constant thing. So he's like, no. But see, David was different. He was like, I won't forget Yah, no matter where I am, no matter who I'm amongst. I'm always loyal to mine and Yah. And that's something that I think as so-called Black people that we really, really struggle with. So our wilderness journey and discipline was preparing us to is preparing us to submit to the rulership of our Messiah. See, we've been under a lot of occupations. We've been under a lot of bad rulers. We know what bad looks like. We don't realize what it's going to look like when we have somebody who rules with iron fist. It doesn't mean, or iron rod. It doesn't mean this idea that that it's just murder for murder, because it's not murder. It's not just killing for killing. This is the rule, this is the law, right? And then this is the consequence of it. We heard 45 say this week that when the looting starts, the shooting starts. I will add this addendum because he did go back and say this. I'm going to go with the context of the first one, but I'll say this. He meant that when looting happens, shooting happens. It was not perceived that way the first time it was said, but whatever. But the reality is that we're not under a leadership like that when we're talking about the Messiah. We're not under a leadership that speaks unjustly and imbalance because of race or creed. In that sense, everything that's important to Yah has to do with, one, his word first, two, his people second, and three, their obedience and how that's all tied together. And everybody is going to be held to that same standard. So this idea that there's one law for the stranger and Europeans can act like this and these people can act like this, that's not going to happen under the Messiah's leadership. And it's so much more true. And that's why David got in trouble at times during his leadership, because you're supposed to rule like this. The same law for your house should be the same law for the people, should be the same law for the stranger. And whenever David deviated from that, swift judgment and punishment came, because Yah's standard doesn't change no matter who his people are and no matter who his leadership is. And that's what we're going to see as we're being prepared to be led by our Messiah, the laws, statutes, and commandments of Elohim, and a righteous rule that's going to highlight truly who we are. See, Saul was afraid of who David was, and he was afraid of him killing him, but he didn't know that David was under Yah's laws, statutes, and commandments. The nations are afraid of Hebrews and are afraid of the uprising because some of us, we ain't got it all together. But under righteous ruling, right, then there are righteous judgments. When we speak outside of righteousness, then Yah can't allow it. See, we have to learn Yah's law, statutes, and commandments, just like David had to learn Yah and his heart and his law, statutes, and commandments even deeper to lead his people, because how we act as a nation is a direct reflection of our Elohim. So you can't just avenge on all people who look like a certain race or on all people who, see, Yah doesn't allow that. There have been times within scripture where people who are of other nations, because of their righteousness, were counted as Israel. And so while you are still full of hatred, and while you are still full of fear, and while you are still full of anger, you can't rule. But when you begin to understand what righteous rule is, then Yah gives us the ability to stand up and be a light and to draw people unto him. Okay. The Elohim, or as we call it, the powers of this earth, and especially everybody sees it, but we have a hard time understanding it, are us. We've been given the power of leadership in this realm. It's just natural. We lead in all negative things, all negative things right now. But if a people can lead aggressively like we do in all things negative, I mean, just pick anything, then how much more so could we lead the people in righteousness? When Yah set up Israel as a nation, he set them up as ones who would draw people to him, not people who would push people away because we chose to take on the minds of our oppressors, or we chose to act in different ways. And it was so serious for Yah that we were powers, or that we had power, right? And I use that word loosely because when we think power, we think of like magic powers. It's not magic powers. I've chosen you because, one, not just because you were so great, because he says that, but there was something in your ancestors, and there was something in you that I was going to use to bring forth and show my glory. And whenever you resist that, obviously there's punishment. So in Psalm 82, Yah speaks about that. He says, Elohim stands in the divine assembly among the divine, being Being in the divine beings, he pronounces judgment. How long will you judge perversely, showing favor to the wicked? Selah. Judge the wretched and the orphan, vindicate the lowly and the poor. Rescue the wretched and the needy, save them from the hand of the wicked. They neither know nor understand. They go about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth totter. I had taken you for divine beings, sons of the Most High, all of you, but you shall die as men do and fall like any prince. Arise, O Elohim, judge the earth, for all the nations are your possession. So you see where Yah regards us, right? Does it make sense? Okay. So he's using us as a beacon of light to draw others. David's story is a motif of this truth. He is pursued because his enemy knows he will be king. Saul in the text is jealous of David because he is no longer chosen, and his jealousy causes him to fear David, not knowing the manner of who David is and the laws truly of which he follows, because Saul is playing and teeter-tottering with the law, but David is truly seeking to walk circumspect with Yah. Our enemies in this country fear us, not knowing that those of us who are truly awakened are called to wait on Yah. Not avenge or act in disobedience. We've already seen that it doesn't work. We can't fight back. We learned that all the way from Babylon, right? We learned that in Jeremiah. If you fight back, you're going to die. Because, see, you're fighting against your discipline. I don't know if anybody's ever gotten a whooping, but I grew up in a black home. And whoopings happen. You know, whoopings always get worse when you start fighting back. Like, so you think I'm just whooping you for no reason, and now you're angry, and so you're going to fight back. The whooping just gets way, way intense. Yah is not necessarily a black daddy like that or a black mama like that. But the reality is you're not accepting the chastisement. And I know you're not accepting it because your mind is not changing and your heart is not softening, right? We rejected to listen to our family and ancestors who came out of slavery. We rejected to hear them about oppression that they told us about. We went as far as even reject the truth that they told us about who we were. They would say, hey, you're from this tribe, or hey, you're Native American, or hey, our people didn't come from here. And they would say, don't know black people know where they came from. I've heard that. I'm like, but my aunt is like 100 and something years old. And she told me that we came from Madagascar on a Dutch slave ship. And I mean, I can trace it through the documentation that you all have kept. And so you were hoping no black people remember where they came from. But the reality is we did, and we were taught not to trust our story, not to trust our narrative, because our narrative is what leads us to redemption. So when we're looking at being in the wilderness amongst our people, we mentioned this last week. I didn't read all of Revelation 12, but I am going to read it because there's a very, very imperative part. And it's echoed, I guess, in Revelation 12. We see it with David going amongst the Philistines. And then we'll get back to David and him and the Philistines. I'll show you our maps and our chart. So in Revelation 12, it says, and there appeared a great wonder in Shamayim, or in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Okay, so who's the woman? I think the more we awaken to who we are, the more these stories become, and they become not stories, first of all, but they make sense. See, allegory and imagery doesn't work when you don't understand culture and context of the people who the allegory and imagery is about. But if you see a woman, right, it's this image of a woman, and she has 12 stars on her head, and you understand that literally from Bereshit all the way through, there's 12 tribes, then obviously the woman becomes, your mind immediately opens up. But if you're in America, and you're looking for a woman with 12 stars, and you might think she's Statue of Liberty. Not so, okay? This book from beginning to end focuses on Yah and his people, period. There may be other nations mentioned, but the focus is to understand the story and the responsibility and the redemption of Yah's people. Okay, so there's a woman, moon under her feet, and upon her head are 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So the picture is the beast, the dragon. The dragon we know is the adversary, and whoever chooses to allow him to enact upon them. He's waiting like this for this baby to be born. Okay. And she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto Elohim and to his throne. So we know who that is. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of Elohim, okay, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was war in Shamayim, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. This is also a cultural and a contextual thing. So as you notice, the story is going like in heaven and in earth. And there's this like, you're going back and forth, It's really poetic. Okay. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our Elohim, and the power of his Mashiach, or his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our Elohim day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives even unto death. This is the part that is imperative and speaks of us today, and where we should be mentally in our walk with Yah. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and a times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. See, the difference between David going into the Philistines is that David stayed connected with Yah. The difference between us going to the nations is that we messed up and forgot that part that Yah said, don't do as these nations around you do. So then I chastised you. You were released, and we were still in the land of our oppression, but we began to understand who we were, and then we forgot, and then we understand, we forget. And so the adversary is like, I have to flood them. I have to cause them to disobey their Elohim. I'm going to find them, and I'm going to do the same things I've always done, which is women, pagan idols, drugs, the other nations, coveting, all the things that Yah told us not to do, which has always been a problem. Okay, so right here. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war. Now here we are. This is us. With the remnant of her seed. This is the signification of the remnant from amongst the remnant, which keep the commandments of Elohim, comma, and have the testimony of Yahushua HaMashiach. It's both. David knew Yah, but he also understood that he had a Messiah. In this wilderness, that is probably our greatest test. The adversary has flooded the minds of especially Black people here, but all over the world, with this image of a European Christ, and with the false laws of the European Christ. And it has caused those who have awakened to their Hebrew heritage to reject the Hamashiach because of the counter image of him. But what Yah is looking for in the wilderness as he's causing us to pass under the rod is one who is attached to him, his law, statutes, and commandments, and to the revelation of the Hamashiach, and keeps that testimony, because that is the test. David, right, when he went into the land of Philistines, he didn't forget that he was a Hebrew. He didn't forget Yah, and he didn't forget Yah's salvation. And if you haven't read David's story, and if you haven't read his Psalms, then it would be a great time too to know that. Every time David doesn't kill Saul, we're going to go back to this because you see the enemy is warring, right, against the seed. And the seed is trying to stay focused. David is that person. So every time David doesn't kill Saul, he gets more and more fearful because he knows he deserves death for his actions. Okay. He goes further and further to his own demise. The same is true of us in this nation. They fear allowing us to be who we are. They fear releasing the artifacts and the slave ledgers with our true identity because the power it will take and the privilege it will dismantle. Saul was afraid of handling over the kingdom, so he would rather make an enemy of Yahuwah than to concede that he was wrong and let Yah take care of the rest. All right, let's get back to our text. So 1 Samuel 27. So verse 2. So David and the 600 men with him went across over to King Achish, son of Moab of Gath. Now, if you don't know who Gath is or where Gath is the land of the Philistines, okay? And we have one famous character that we know that comes from Gath, and it's Goliath. So my first mind, I'm like, man, not only is David an enemy of Saul, but he's also kind of an enemy of the Philistines because he killed their big dog, right? He killed Goliath. And not only to kill Goliath, but they've warred back and forth between one another. It was interesting, though, when we read about the Philistines are Israel's enemy, but they're not just an enemy because they don't understand the Hebrews. Oh, they understood the Hebrews and their customs. If you remember, if you go back to, I think it was chapter 15, I could be a little off, but it was when they were going out to battle, and then they brought the ark out. And the Philistines said, we ain't never seen this before. They were like, that thing doesn't come out. We know it's there, but that doesn't come out. And remember, they brought it out and the Philistines took it. And then they took it, Yah gave them hemorrhoids. And then they put the hemorrhoids and stuff and made them into gold and then sent the cart back. And then the ark didn't dwell with the people. See, they even reverenced Yah. See, we forget that our disobedience to Abba Yah doesn't change the fact that the powers that be know that the world is held together by him. And they fear him even more than we do. And they don't fear him enough to follow him. They fear him enough to keep us oppressed so that we don't follow him so that they can stay in their position. And the Philistines were a perfect example of that. They knew Yah. They just weren't going to follow him, but they knew that the disobedience of Israel, and as they wreaked havoc among them, it would keep Israel disobedient, which would then keep them able to steal and take and kill and beat them. Like, they knew that. They were playing on the negative side. Okay, so that's Gath, the land of the Philistines. So each man, his family, and David and his two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelite, and Abigail, wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And when Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he did not pursue him anymore. All right, let me give you a map. So this is my first screen share. Make sure it comes up. Okay. Perfect. And so that area, okay, and obviously so, Joppa, Ashdod. Get some of the time. I want to screen share. All right. I've had to stop. Z, can you text? I can see your text on my screen. Can you hear it now? Okay, perfect. Tell me where I got lost. Where it stopped, where the sound stopped, so I can go back. Okay, so we're going back to the, okay, so the screen share. So when I shared the screen, I was sharing that this is the area here on the side where the land of the Philistines during that time. Okay, and so we had Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod. So if you're reading through the text, you're going to hear a lot of these names: Joppa, Gerar, Ziklag, Lachish, Gath. So right now, Achish, right, is in Gath, and this is where David is gone. Okay, he's in Gath, and he speaks to Achish, and he says, David said to Achish, if you please, let a place be granted to me in one of the country towns where I can live. Why should your servant remain with you in the royal city? So he goes over, essentially, and gives himself as a servant to Achish, king of Gath. Now, we were talking about Goliath and how David had slayed, the Philistines' mighty men. But if you talk about a political move, and not just political as in politics, but a move to not only save Israel, right, but a move also to allow things to just kind of play out. So David goes to Achish, right? And he's David. He is a mighty warrior. And it almost looks like the Hebrews or the Israelites are conceding, right? Because remember, the Hebrews have served the Philistines before. They took their weapons. They were causing them to work. And I think I compared it to the movie A Bug's Life when they had to serve the grasshoppers. Like that's the picture. So David, their mighty warrior, goes over, and we think of this area as so spread out, but these people in this area, right, they know each other, and word gets around, just like people were telling Saul where David was going, and we saw him doing this, we saw him doing that. The Philistines also hear word, just like in this nation. When stuff happens in the Black community or in small community that seems irrelevant to the people around you, people hear about it, right? It becomes big. Why? Because the focus of the world or of that area has been placed on these people, because remember, they came out of Egypt. They are battling. They've been given this land, this territory. It's like, when they came through and they went to Rahab, she's like, we heard you were coming, right? The word travels, right? It wasn't cell phones and social media back then. It was word of mouth. It was people who said things or saw things and they reported back. That's how things traveled. So Gath would have known, and for sure Achish, because he's the king, right? So when the first time he probably saw David, was probably like, why is he even out here? Word gets back. Oh, it's a little internal little rift going on with the Hebrews. So they're fighting each other. All right. So then Saul is fighting still against the Philistines. We know that, right? And then David fought against the Philistines in Keilah. So now he's here and he's in front of Achish and he's telling him that he speaks, I'm your servant. I'm coming here. So imagine the clout that comes with that. Word getting out like, hey, guess what? David, he's here. Yeah, he's my servant. David, the one that was that one. He's here. And his people have rejected him. So he came here. So now, oh, it's about to go down. I'm about to get all of the land back from the Hebrew. Remember, they're being pushed out of the land. So he thinks, I'm going to have him go out and kill up all the Israelites. We're going to get all of our land back. We're going, oh, this is amazing. So he's thinking of it as like a win for him. He's like, all right, you can have Ziklag. So Ziklag is that second place that I circled down at the bottom. It's right on the border between Philistia, right, and the territory of Judah. So it gives him this land. Verse 6, at that time, Achish granted him Ziklag. That is how Ziklag belonged to the kings of Judah and is still the case. So that became inherited into Judah. If you go back, and I was saying this earlier, and look at the artifacts and some of the recent findings, I think as late as 2019, so last year, they have actually uncovered this area of Ziklag. And we know that it belongs to Philistines based upon the markings and the writings and the dating. So they actually have been excavating this area. So if you look at Times of Israel and a couple of other anthropology sites, they actually do some extensive research and study and show you this area and what it looks like. And I think it now may be open for tourism. I'm not entirely sure, but it may be. Okay, so it says the length of time that David lived in the Philistine territory was 1 year and 4 months. So he was able, we're getting ready to hear about, he was able to keep this up for 1 year and 4 months. So he lives in this area. And if you think about it, they had their own camp. So it wasn't like they were like living in a city. He asked for the country area. He said, I don't want to live in your cities with your idols and all your stuff. Give me a place off to the side. Why? So he can still worship Yah and do what he's supposed to do. Like sometimes we want what they have so bad that we don't know that Yah has set provision in a place for us where we can serve him. And Yah has done that so many times for our people, even in this country. And I know it's hard for people who know the oppression of this country to see that Yah has also done things and given us providential care in this land, but he has. We've had land, lots of it, as Black people in this country. We've had spaces outside of the city and the metropolises to serve Yah and to build our own. Not when we tried to integrate, not when we wanted to tell the people who we were trying to stay away from what we were doing, but when we were silently doing our own thing. Always when we broadcast what we have and what we're doing and how we're doing it against their system, that they begin to dismantle it, right? Because it does not, it's the house of cards. See, David was wise. He was like, I'm going to get me something away from them. They tricked us and had us go, we want the city. We want the lights. We want the cars. We want the fancy. We want the, and we moved ourselves directly in the midst of their abominations, right? We did a Lot instead of an Abraham. And we went in the midst of them. And now you have us trying to serve in the midst of their calamity. David wasn't even going to have it. He was like, I'm not going to allow my men, their wives, and maybe even their children that were born during that time to even get caught up in that mess. But he doesn't do it disrespectfully. He says, why would you want me, an Israelite, to dwell in the royal city? You think he gave a two hoots about the uncircumcised Philistines, as he called them, just a few years back? He didn't care about their royal anything. He's telling him what he needs to hear so that he sees that David is lowly and humble. Sometimes you have to be humble to the people who are not humble to you. So he goes and he tells them, why would you have me? Your people gonna feel some type of way if there's 600 of us living amongst you. Put us off to the side in some country town. David knew the wilderness. He's good with it. I don't have to worry about them watching me. I can see them coming. They can see me coming. We have a mutual understanding and respect. I'm good. So he gives them Ziklag. And then even more so, it was something that stayed within the inheritance of the kings of Judah, as it said in the text. Okay, so he's there for a year and 4 months. And David and his men went up. This is the part where he goes good. He went up and raided the Geshurites, the Gizerites, and the Amalekites, who were the inhabitants of the region of Elam. Okay, so they're there and they're beyond. So I'm going to show you a second map. So Gizerites, Gerites, where is this at? He's killing up people in the Philistine territory. He's down here, right? And he was positioned perfectly, mind you, because he was right on the border of his own land, his own people. And while he's there, he's not stepping and fetching it. He's not a servant to Achish, right? He is still doing Yah's work in the midst of the land of the Philistines. But he has the trust and respect. Now, this story is a little interesting because even what he does, even though he's killing up these people, is noble. It's kind of weird. Remember, this territory belongs to Israel, and the Philistines are Israel's enemies. They are idol worshippers. They have come in. They have killed Israel. So they're not friends. They're not friends. So he didn't say your friend. He says your servant. I'm at your disposal, right? Okay. So he's in this area. The second part is it says he goes all the way to Shur. Let me see if let me turn off my, there we go. And how do well, I can't erase my little markings, but just know I'm not marking that. Shur is here, and this is the Negev, and this is Philistia, right? And then if it was zoomed in, you would see that this area on the right side is what we call the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea, right here. So Philistia, here you have Philistia, the Negev Desert, Beersheba, that area, wilderness of Paran, Kadesh Barnea, Shur. Okay, so he's all through this area, kind of wreaking havoc in a righteous way. Okay, so he goes all the way to the land of Egypt. And when David attacked a region, and this was hard for me, just reading and just processing this. When David attacked a region, he would leave no man or woman alive. He would take flocks, herds, asses, camels, and clothing. Okay. So I first look at that, I'm like, dang, he killed everybody. And I know that's a constant question that comes up with people like, well, why would God allow people to be killed? And why would God allow da? And the first thing I always have to go to in my mind is the yes and the amen that is necessary when the Most High executes his judgment, however he chooses to execute it. Because see, we may feel some type of way, but we don't know the whole story. Yah never allows something and never calls somebody to do something without the full story being there. And so that was my first thing. Second thing is we are going to approach a time, maybe not in my lifetime, but when Yah will do that and will execute judgment. And the answer and our response has to be yes and amen. Whether it's your people, whether it's my people, whether it's somebody else's people, because he has been long suffering. He has been full of grace and mercy and has withheld his wrath for so long, having to deal with the stench of our disobedience rising to his nose. So that part I had to just like, okay, yeah, yes and amen. But also he gives a reason why, two reasons. One, these people are enemies of Israel. They've killed their people, and that they will continue to do so because they believe that this land is theirs. So there's a constant war that's happening. When Yah told Israel to take that land, he told them to utterly wipe out certain groups, and they didn't do it. See, David didn't have that problem. He understood perfect obedience, even if it wasn't something that necessarily he just wanted to do. Okay, so he took all this, the flocks, the herds, the asses, and the camels, and the clothing. Said when he returned and came to Achish. So he didn't just take the stuff and then sit out in Ziklag with a whole bunch of stuff, but then he brings the stuff back to Achish. So this is Achish. This is funny. Achish is an interesting guy. Achish would ask, so when David would go out, so this wasn't all done at one time. This was done within that span of the time that David was in that region. So then he would come back to Achish, and Achish would ask, where did you raid today? Right? Why is Achish excited? You'll see. And then David will reply, the Negev of Judah, and the Negev of the Jeremielites, or the Negev of the Kenites. And David would leave no man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he thought they might tell about us. David did this. Such was his practice as long as he stayed in the territory of the Philistines. So he never changed up. He was like, okay, I'm in the area of the Philistines, and they let me here. So y'all didn't just put me here for nothing. He was like, I'm going to then dismantle the enemy from within. And so when he comes back, I don't know why Achish never checked. I think that's also interesting. He was so enthralled with the idea of David being in his midst that he didn't even think that, like, he was like, oh man, he's killing up his own people and he's bringing back stuff. There's no people saying that it didn't happen. So that was wisdom. David was like, okay, I'm gonna have to kill everybody. These are enemies. And I'm gonna bring the stuff back to Achish, right? So he's not even gonna question it because look at all the stuff I'm bringing back. And then I'm gonna tell him that I'm killing up Judah in the territories of the Negev and the Jeremielites, right? And so these people, the Kenites, remember, are the direct descendants of Caleb. The Jeremielites are descendants of Judah. And then the other one was the Amalekites, who are Esau. Esau, yeah, told the Israelites to wipe them completely out. So that wasn't even a question. So it wasn't. So what other names are mentioned? Who else? It said the Gezerites. Oh, I go back page. Here we go. So it was the Gezerites, the Geshurites, the Gizerites, the Geshurites, and the Amalekites were the people he destroyed. And in not leaving them, and then telling him that he had destroyed the people from Judah. Okay. See, Achish wanted to believe. Mom says, you don't ever believe a lie you don't want to believe. So he wanted to believe that David had been completely abhorred by his own people. He's actually going to mention that. The enemy also wants us to be in the land and take on the customs so that we can be completely abhorred by Yah. Why? David, in this text, Achish is going to call David his servant. Because he's like, if he's utterly abhorred by them, I don't know where to go. This whole region is inhabited by Israelites. If he's killing up his own people, he can never go back home, which makes him a slave to me. So it says he brought him to Gath and he didn't keep any people alive because the people would say, such was his, the people would say, this will be his practice as long as he's here, and they would try to get rid of him, right? So they might, he's right here, it says, they might tell us about David. They might tell about us, David did this. Such was his practice as long as he stayed in the territory of the Philistines. So he did this the whole time he was there. Verse 12, Achish trusted David. He thought he was aroused of the wrath of his own people, Israel, and so he will be my vassal or my servant forever. He thought he was so mad at Israel for what Saul did that he was just going to he's like, I don't even have to go out and fight anymore. So the providential care is none of Israel, including Saul and his men, had to fight with the Philistines as long as David was amongst the Philistines, because they thought they had David killing up all of his own people. So it caused like a ceasefire, a cease war, where Israel was actually allowed to live in peace and conquest in other areas without the Philistines, like I said, sore oppressing them. It was like an amazing thought of David's. I mean, obviously it came from Yah. So he didn't allow himself to be enthralled and caught up in the ways of the Philistines while he was there. David's wisdom is unparalleled. He was allowed to hide and to help his people. He dwells in the midst of his enemies and does not sell out. He is dismantling the master's house with his own tools. Turn to Jeremiah 30, and I have just like a couple more notes. And just this in part, because this is very important to what the redemption of Israel looks like in the process. And so I know we've been kind of in the past 2 weeks going back and forth between current times and the redemption of Israel, but I think it's very important in these times to use Torah as a basis to reflect our actions, because we're learning something from our ancestors and how we should act in the midst of our enemies, whether that enemy is from without or whether the enemy is from within. And it's also always in order to be reminded of what Yah said, because sometimes we read through things and they don't contextually fit into the times, or they don't hit at the right times the way they should. So let's go to Jeremiah 30 and let's see what Yah thinks about our redemption. The word which came to Jeremiah from Yahuwah. Thus saith Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, write it down in a scroll, all the words that I have spoken to you. For days are coming, declares Yahuwah, when I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel and Judah, saith Yahuwah. And I will bring them back to the land that I have gave their fathers, and they shall possess it. And these are the words that Yahuwah spake concerning Israel and Judah. This is very important, especially in context to where we are in our obedience. We see that David's obedience fits in line with Yah's plan, which shows that our obedience then will put us in a line with Yah's plan. Okay. Verse 5. Thus saith Yahuwah, we have heard cries of panic, terror without relief. Ask and see. Surely males do not bear young, but why do I see every man with his hand on his loins like a woman in labor? Why have all the faces turned pale? Ah, the day is awesome. There is none like it. I don't know if anybody else feels like this right now, but I totally do. It is a time of trouble for Jacob, but he shall be delivered from it. In that day, declares Yahuwah of hosts, I will break the yoke from off your neck, and I will rip off your bonds. Strangers shall no longer make slaves of them. Instead, they shall serve Yahuwah their Elohim, and David the king, whom I will raise up from them. Now, it's not David, but the word here, David, has been translated as David, but it means the beloved king. David's name is beloved. But you can see how that fits into place. David is an example of that servant. And he says, whom I will rise up for them. 10. But you have no fear, my servant Jacob, declares Yahuwah. Be not dismayed, O Israel. I will deliver you from far away, your folk from their land of captivity, and Jacob shall again have comb. What other people are still in the land of their captivity? You can't deliver a people unless they're still in the land of their captivity. We talked about this. All the nations in history who have ever been held captive have been allowed to go home. Yah is delivering a people who are in the land of their captivity. Okay. He says, and Jacob shall have calm and quiet with none to trouble him. For I am with you to deliver you, declares Yahuwah. I will make an end of all the nations among which I have dispersed you. That couldn't have happened because it hasn't happened. All the nations are still intact. But I will not make an end of you. I will not leave you unpunished, but I will chastise you in measure. For thus saith Yahuwah, your injury is incurable, your wound severe. No one pleads for the healing of your sickness. We keep saying, why won't my white allies stand up? Why won't anybody speak out? Why is this happening to Black people and nobody's saying anything? Because Yah said they wouldn't. There is no remedy, there is no remedy, no recovery for you. All of your lovers have forgotten you. They love Black culture, but do they love Black people? They do not seek you out, for I have struck you as an enemy strikes. Yah did it. With cruel chastisement, because your iniquity was so great and your sins so many. Why cry out over your injury that your wound is incurable? I did these things to you because your iniquity was so great and your sins so many. Assuredly, all who wanted to devour you shall be devoured. Now he's like, I did it, but wait. And every one of your foes shall go into captivity. Those who despoil you shall be despoiled. And all who pillage you, I will give up to pillage. but I will bring healing to you. Who's going to do it? Yeah. And cure you of your wound, declares Yahuwah. He says, see, it's incurable unless I cure it. Though they called you outcast, that Zion whom no one seeks out. You see, you outcast and nobody even looks for you. Thus saith Yahuwah, I will restore the fortress of Jacob's tents and have compassion upon his dwellings. The city shall be rebuilt on its mound and the fortress in its proper place. For them shall issue thanksgiving and the sound of dancers, and I will multiply them, and they shall not be few, and I will make them honored. And they shall not be humbled. His children shall be as of old, and his community shall be established by my grace. And I will deal with all his oppressors. His chieftain shall be one of his own. Nobody else going to rule over you. Somebody out of your own. His ruler shall come from his midst. I will bring him near that he may approach me, declares Yahuwah. For who would otherwise dare approach me? You shall be my people, and I will be your Elohim. He's not letting up. Like you're not, there's no other option. You're gonna be my people, and I'm gonna be your Elohim. Period. Lo, the storm of Yahuwah goes forth in fury, a raging tempest. It shall whirl down upon the head of the wicked. The anger of Yahuwah shall not turn back till it has fulfilled and completed his purposes. In the days to come, you shall perceive it. At that time, declares Yahuwah, I will be Elohim to the clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. We have to learn from our ancestors how to navigate through trouble, and how to walk circumspect, and how to wait on Yahuwah. He already said what he was going to do, but you keep prolonging it by transgressing. He's like, your sins are too much. It's too much. This is what I want to do, but I can't do it because I promised you I would utterly destroy you. But if I do it now, I'm going to utterly destroy you because your sin and your wound is too much. You've been chastised too much. You're weak. You're frail. You can't take it. If I come now, it's going to be all bad. And you're like, I'm not listening. And so Yahushua gives us a lesson on how to live under Roman occupation. So if you haven't, go back through. See, you guys keep looking at our text, not as our history. So the text, the words are not a book to be studied to know more than somebody, but it's a book to be studied because it's history, and our people, because of their disobedience, have gone through the same things over and over again. So we have lessons on how to act in the midst of these things. So you have people who reject the Brit Hadashah, but in it is valuable lessons for occupation. So we're like, how do we live when people are oppressing us and when we're under military and martial law? And you don't think that Yahushua was under martial law? You don't think that having Romans occupying your land and raping your women and stealing your things and being able to do whatever they wanted was occupation? Was not martial law? So we have an example of how a person not only was against the system, right? They wanted him to overthrow the system. Didn't understand. It's like, if I do that, you're gonna die. So how do I live in a time where I have a Roman oppressor and I'm without rights because of my disobedience? See, they were under oppression because there's a disobedience. Go back to the Maccabean period. Go back to when they became Hellenized and when they allowed the Romans in, and then the Edomite was on the throne. So many things were upside down during that time. And so we're given how to believe, how to walk, how to resist, how to not get caught up in politics. All those things are in the life and journey of the Hamashiach and his disciples. David shows us how to live amongst our enemies and wait for the revelation of the truth of our royalty. See, David was king, but he was on the run. He was disenfranchised. His family was in Moab. He was on the run. His wife had been given to somebody else. He was being lied on amongst his own land. How am I ever going to rule as king when the standing king is lying on me and telling everybody that I'm a rogue. I don't really understand how this is going to work out, but I'm going to stay faithful. I'm even going to go as far as to be faithful in the land of my enemies, waiting for the revelation of who I am. I've been anointed. I know I am. I have to remind myself, okay, yeah, I did choose me. Okay, Samuel's dead. I need to remember these things. I remember constantly calling on the acts that were done to show me who I am. It's the same thing we should be doing. Remembering who you are. Man, this Bible does point to me. These things are true. I am disenfranchised. We were taken in slave ships. We are in this country. We are in the land of our captivity. But yeah, I did say he was going to redeem me. That has to be my focus. I have to remember who I am and wait on the revelation of that to everyone else. But I have to know it first, and I have to act on it and act in obedience. Abraham shows us how to be a stranger in a strange land, but wait on the promise. We are strangers in a strange land, but there's a promise. Yeah, I set forth a promise. We have such great cloud of witnesses, and we must begin to use their wisdom recorded for us for a time like this. So we are also in an interesting time because we're in the time of Shavuot. And we talked yesterday about how Shavuot is a feast of freedom. And it is an ingathering feast, but it's also a feast that talks about the giving of Yah's laws to allow us to be obedient. Because if he doesn't tell us how to be obedient, then we'll constantly make mistakes and then it's just unfair. But he's given us the rules to be obedient so that when we stray or when we end up in times like this, we have a path to return to. We don't have to shoot in the dark. We don't have to look for other leaders. We don't have to be lost and blind and angry and vengeful and just hurt by the lack of care from other people. He's already told us how this will play out, and he has given us a position. And our position to play in this game is obedience. Our position is not to play the shooter man. Our position to play is not the man of war. He's like, I got that covered. Our position is not to play the vengeance. He's like, I got that covered too. He got it covered so cold-blooded that it says, and one of the verses says, he will return. And the garments of Hamashiach will be so red, it'll look like one that has tread the wine press. You ever stomped on grapes or wasted wine? Imagine that. And it said, and the blood will rise to the horse's bridle. See, y'all can't do that. That's a Yah-size war and a battle. Our job is obedience. We get in line because imagine this. Say something happens and somebody breaks in your house and you tell your kids, go in the room, go in the closet, don't leave out no matter what, right? And you're going at it with the enemy or the person, the intruder, right? You either shooting, fighting, whatever, however you're hand-to-hand combat, and your 4-year-old walks out the room. Immediately, I'm like, no, get back. Like, you're going to, see, Yah is just like, if you could just be obedient, I can fight. But we act like the 4-year-old. We always want to pop our little raggedy heads out into the way. And now it's like, I now have to protect you. And when you do that, you mess up things. Your position is obey what I say. Do what I told you to do. And it seems like you're checking out on the world. Get some land, grow some food, shut your mouth, mind your business, get some popcorn, watch the show. I have this. If I said it in that verse in Jeremiah 30, the chapter, declared it. He didn't think it. He said it. Nothing that comes out of Yah's mouth returns to him void, ever. So our issue is that we don't trust that he's going to do what he's going to do. So then we take it into our own hands. And David shows us that so many times of how he got ready to, and he said, oh, thank Yah for not letting me take vengeance into my own hands. We saw it with Nabal, right? Okay. So we are in the time of Shavuot, and there's a blessing in Shavuot, and it's literally for these times. It's for the times of a people to remember who they are, where they are, and the redemption. Okay? I have it here. And it's Deuteronomy chapter 26. So we're going to read over the Shavuot blessing because this evening we'll be going into Shavuot, and I think it's very much relevant to the redemption and the freedom and us understanding who we are, walking circumspect during this time, this specific time in this place, in this generation. Actually, I'm going to read a verse before I read that verse. Go with me to Psalm 24. I think it is. Here it is. It's a good reminder, and it's a good segue into 26. It's a song of David Dauid, and he says, the earth is Yahuwah's and all that it holds, right, in the fullness thereof, the King James Version. The world and its inhabitants, for he founded it upon the ocean and set it on the nether streams. Who may ascend to the mountain of Yahuwah? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken a false oath by my life or sworn deceitfully. He shall carry away a blessing from Yahuwah, a just reward from Elohim, his deliverer. Such is the circle of those who turn to him, Jacob, who seek your presence. O gates, lift up your heads, up high, you everlasting doors, so the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? Yahuwah, mighty and valiant. Yahuwah, valiant in battle. O gates, lift up your heads. Let them up, you everlasting doors, so the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? Yahuwah of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. So let's look at Deuteronomy. This would be the blessing that would be said. So people have asked me about Shavuot. So this would be the blessing that the people would say as they brought their first fruits. And I thought this was amazing because, and this verse is very important. In the King James, it says, this is the generation that seeks thee, O Jacob, Selah. And it's saying that these are the people who seek Yah. And I believe that the hearts and minds of the people in this time are ripe for the seeking of Yah. We are seeking him, and as we are seeking him, he is opening up our eyes and our minds to understand him better, and it calls us to walk even more circumspect to his word. And so in this, the people would recite where they've come from and who they are, and would remember. We have forgotten, and that's why we grope in the dark. Our protests and everything look like blind people just tearing at stuff with no direction, hoping that in your tantrum you're seen. And Yah is saying, oh goodness, I've given you the remedy. And it always seems to happen during a time where you can choose between obeying him and keeping his way and his peace, or going with the world and doing it their way. And then seeing the difference between those who do and those who don't. We're in that time again. Deuteronomy 26 says, and it shall be when thou art come into the land which Yahuwah your Elohim give thee for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwell therein, that thou shalt take the first of all the fruit of the earth, which thou shalt bring of thy land, and that Yahuwah Elohim giveth thee, and shalt put it in a basket, and shalt go into the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose to place his name there. And thou shalt go into the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, so this is what you say, I profess this day unto Yahuwah Elohim that I am come into the country with which Yahuwah sware unto our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of your hand, and shall set it down before the altar of Yahuwah your Elohim. And thou, as you, shall speak and say before Yahuwah your Elohim, Assyrian, and in some cases Aramean, Assyrian ready to perish was my father. And he went down into Egypt and sojourned there with a few, and became there a great nation, great and mighty and populous. Talk about Abraham. And the Egyptians evil entreated us and afflicted us, and laid upon us hard bondage. And when we cried unto Yahuwah, Elohim of our fathers, Yahuwah heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. Can you imagine us in this land saying this? Think of it. And Yahuwah brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs and with wonders. And he hath brought us into this place, and has given us this land, even a land that floweth with milk and honey. And now behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which thou, O Yahuwah, hast given me. And thou shalt set it before Yahuwah your Elohim, and worship before Yahuwah your Elohim. And thou shalt rejoice in every good thing which Yahuwah your Elohim hath given unto you, and unto thine house, and unto you, and the Levite, and the stranger that is among you. And when thou hast made an end of tithing all the tithes of thine increase, the third year, which is the year of tithing, and hast given it unto the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat within thy gates and be filled, then thou shalt say before Yahuwah your Elohim, I have brought away the hollow things of mine house, and have also given them unto the Levite, and unto the stranger, and to the fatherless, and unto the widow, according to all thy commandments, which thou hast commanded me. And I have not transgressed thy commandments, neither have I forgotten them. I have not eaten thereof in my mourning, neither have I taken away aught thereof, any unclean use, nor given aught thereof for the dead. But I have hearkened to the voice of Yahuwah my Elohim, and I have done according to all that thou hast commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven, and bless thy people Israel, and the land which thou hast given us, as thou swearest unto our fathers, a land that floweth with milk and honey. This day Yahuwah my Elohim that your Elohim hath commanded thee to do these statutes and judgments. Thou shalt therefore keep and do them with all thine heart and with all thy soul. Thou shalt avouch Yahuwah this day to be thy Elohim, and to walk in his ways, and to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments, to hearken unto his voice. And Yahuwah hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee, and that thou shouldest keep all his commandments. You see that marriage exchange, right? This is what he says he's going to do. This is what you're going to do. And at the end when they say, and now by the power vested in me, and it's like he's saying it. He says, and to make thee high above all nations which he hath made, in praise and in my name and in honor, that thou mayest be a holy people unto Yahuwah your Elohim, as he has spoken. Let me tell you why Shavuot and this is so important. See, most people think that these feast days have been done away with because we don't have a temple. That's even for Hebrews, right? So we shouldn't have to do certain things. Let me find this verse. I think it's this one. Zechariah, let's go to Zechariah chapter 14. Yeah, I'll pull it up here and I'll share my screen. See, we have been utterly convinced that this stuff is old. So let me go here. All right. It says, behold, the day of Yahuwah cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And the half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall Yahuwah go forth and fight against those nations. And when he fought in the day of battle, as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. And Yahuwah, my Elohim, shall come, and all the saints with thee. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to Yahuwah, not day nor night. No man knows the day or the hour, right? But it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light, and it shall be in that day that living water shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the Hinder sea. In summer and in winter it shall be. And Yahuwah shall be king over all the earth, and in that day shall there be one master, or one Yahuwah, and his name Echad, or one. And all the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba to Ramon, south of Jerusalem. And it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place. For Benjamin's gate, from Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate, unto the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananiel, unto the king's winepress. And the men shall dwell therein, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. And this shall be the plague wherewith Yahuwah will smite the people that he fought against Jerusalem, that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. And it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from Yahuwah shall be among them. And they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor, and Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem. And the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. And so shall the plague of the horse and of the mule and of the beast and of the tents and of the plague. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations, here we go. Oh, everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King Yahuwah of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King Yahuwah of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up, and come not, they have no rain. There shall be plague, and wherewith Yahuwah will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto Yahuwah. And the pots in Yahuwah's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto Yahuwah of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and seething therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of Yahuwah of hosts. The feasts are important. The harvest is important. Rain is important. So as we look at these times and we ponder whether or not we should participate or whether or not we should be obedient, know that we are practicing for eternity. We do not want to be counted on the other end, and our obedience is our redemption. Not our war, not our battle, but our obedience is our redemption. Let's use the examples that we've been given by Elohim to continue to move forward and walk circumspect to him. Shalom.